Most people, when they picture a crime scene, imagine a four-walled room, a family home, maybe a storefront, maybe a parking lot, somewhere with solid ground underfoot where the police can string up that yellow tape and get to work. But how do you process the abyss? How do you even begin to track the ocean floor? People say it is like looking for a needle in a haystack. But honestly, even that metaphor fails to capture the sheer scale of the water. Lynette Hooker has been missing for over 2 weeks. In warm waters, teeming with life, a dark question begins to surface. What actually happens to a human body in that environment? It is not about being callous. It is about facing a brutal reality. In the Bahamas, if you go overboard and aren't found fast, you simply become part of the food chain. Sharks, rays, fish, and crustaceans all share that space. To really grasp the gravity of this, investigators turn to a man who knows the depths better than anyone, a forensic diver. His name is Alexander Beer. He is an instructor for rescue operations and a veteran of South Florida law enforcement who has spent nearly his entire life navigating the seas. Even though he is not officially on the Hooker case, his background allows him to spot those subtle red flags that others might just breeze past. The biggest one involves the Soulmate, the couple's 44-foot sailboat. Most people have the same immediate reaction: wait, I thought they were in the small dinghy. The explanation for that is worth sitting down for. And if this story is getting under your skin like it is for everyone else following it, drop a like and subscribe so you do not miss a single update on this missing wife. Let's get into the heart of the analysis. His experience with the water and criminal investigations is without a doubt massive. 18 years. That is how long he has been submerged in this field, making him an undeniable authority on the subject. His main focus is public safety diving. He works for a major police agency down in South Florida. On top of that, he travels the country teaching other specialized dive teams as a corporate instructor for Dive Rescue International. What he does is precise. It is delicate. He has poured an incredible amount of time into underwater searches and processing scenes beneath the waves. His career has been built on recovering evidence, victims, and objects in conditions that are nothing short of nightmare fuel. When asked what his first move would be if he were running the show in the Bahamas, his answer was telling. He made it clear that coming from a law enforcement background, he tries not to sit back and judge another agency's work from a distance. It is a fair point. No one knows for sure what evidence those investigators have in their hands or which dead ends they have already explored. But there is one golden rule in any underwater search. The single most important factor for a successful operation is nailing down the point of last sighting. We are talking about the exact coordinate where that person was seen alive for the very last time. The problem here: the only witness is the husband. He is the only other person who was on that boat, so there is zero outside certainty about where that last contact actually happened. That is the massive wall this entire investigation keeps hitting. Basically, everything hinges on his word. If you just accept his version of events as the gospel truth, then the process is simple. You have him lead the team to the spot where he thinks he saw her go under. That is where you start your grid. But when you do not have that reference point because no one else saw a thing, you are left trying to search an impossibly large body of water. That is when you go to plan B. They left point A and were headed to point B. You use that line as a guide, trying to guess where to start digging. We are talking about a massive, sprawling area. It is a logistical nightmare. The water is a hostile place for an investigation, even when every single variable is going your way. Plus, from what has come to light, Brian Hooker had already moved the sailboat to a different anchorage or mooring before the search even got off the ground. And once that boat moved, even the last physical reference point was gone, unless of course they can pull the electronic data from the vessel. The equipment is already with the authorities. The boat's GPS could be the smoking gun. It would let them map the route and find the last fixed position where they were actually anchored. Only then would they have a destination or a final point to work from, allowing them to build the case backward. There is a system called AIS that needs a much closer look. Understanding how it works is the only way to grasp the reality of the tracking possibilities here. AIS can provide GPS coordinates a pinpoint location. Think of it as a digital ID card. It is mostly used on larger vessels. You will find it on cargo ships and small boats moving through busy harbors. It is a constant signal of who and where they are. Its job is to broadcast a signal to the radars of every other boat in the vicinity. That radar then flags the presence of another ship, showing, for example, a 40-foot sailboat 2 miles off the port bow on a specific heading. It is a vital tool for not crashing into things. Big ships use it specifically for that safety reason. In busy ports, the traffic is thick, and those ships can be tracked almost as accurately as a black box on a plane. Essentially, the system pings the vessel's exact coordinates at any given moment. If the Soulmate, that was the name of their sailboat, actually carried those trackers, investigators would have swarmed that data first. It is the logical starting point. But there is a catch with these smaller boats. The owner can just flip a switch, on or off whenever they want. That is the sticking point. If it was running, the trail is there. But if they cut the power, the investigation hits a brick wall. Total darkness. Most of these crews rely on plotters, though. They are basically digital navigation maps displayed on a screen. These units have a memory of their own, deep inside the hardware. You can actually go to the manufacturer to crack into the system's guts. From there, you can pull every bit of data about where that plotter sat during its final hours on the water. It is the only way to pin down a precise last known coordinate for the sailboat. But here is the real question. If Lynette Hooker really did go over the side, what exactly are they hunting for down there? Aside from her, I mean. It is a mess. When your only roadmap is a single witness's story, every tiny detail starts to feel heavy with meaning. First, the basics. What was she wearing? Did she have jewelry, glasses? Anything that would have stayed with her? They are digging into what was on her feet, and what she might have been holding right at that exact second. They are searching for anything. A cell phone, maybe. Something with enough weight to actually hit the seafloor. And yeah, they are looking for her. But the variables are endless. We know plenty about how bodies behave on solid ground. There are entire college degrees dedicated to human decay on land. It is static, controlled, predictable. You can forecast the weather on land, but there is no massive database for what happens when a body enters the deep. In the water, especially the open ocean, time isn't just a factor. It is an enemy that never stops moving. You have to move fast. After a few days, the chemistry changes. The body bloats, finds its buoyancy, and just drifts away. But in those first moments, if someone drowns, whether it is from an injury or just lack of air, they don't just bob on the surface. They sink, straight to the bottom. An unconscious, drowning victim has a specific weight. It depends on their build, obviously. Their frame. Usually we are talking about 10 to 16 pounds of dead weight. That weight pulls a body down in a near-perfect vertical line. Think about it like this. If the water is 10 feet deep, you draw a straight line down. That body should be within a 10-foot circle of that spot. They don't just start sinking and get swept miles away by the tide. Not at first. They stay right there. But that stillness, it is a ticking clock. And honestly, no one knows exactly how much time you have. Things like their last meal or their body fat percentage. It all plays a role in the process. All of that dictates when the body will eventually float and surrender to the currents. It has been 10 or 11 days since she vanished. That is the window where investigators start to lose sleep. The fear that the body has moved becomes very real. Beyond the movement of the tides, there is something even more haunting. The ocean is full of predators. Down there, life is hungry. A body isn't a person anymore. It is just sustenance. I am not trying to be cold or insensitive here. It is just the reality of the deep. In the Bahamas, you have everything. Sharks, rays, even shrimp and schools of fish. Sometimes a body never resurfaces because of them. Everything happens so fast when there is that much life in the water. Eventually, the search changes. You stop looking for something that resembles a human being. You start hunting for traces, a fragment of cloth, a scrap of something. The whole investigation is pinned to Brian Hooker's story, the husband, regarding where that boat actually was. But remember, he has already moved that sailboat. He took it to a new anchor point over in Marsh Harbor. When you look at the spot where he claims it all went down, he would have left Abaco and entered a stretch where the water is maybe 6 to 10 feet deep. Just 6 feet. So the question is, why can't we see anything? This is the Bahamas. Everyone knows those islands for their crystal clear water, but the truth is rarely as pretty as the travel brochures. That perfect transparent turquoise isn't a guarantee, not by a long shot. The weather dictates everything when it comes to what you can see under the surface. If a storm rolls in or the wind picks up the rain and the swell churn up the seafloor, Suddenly it is not a swimming pool anymore. The water gets thick, murky. Depending on which side of the island you are on, the runoff from a harbor can ruin the visibility in seconds. So no, it isn't as simple as leaning over the rail and seeing 30 feet down. The sea has a way of keeping its secrets. To be honest, the current state of those underwater conditions remains a mystery. In the available footage, the water is clearly not transparent. It looked murky thick, with that treacherous, blinding lack of visibility down there. Even from above, with polarized lenses, there are just too many shadows and shifting shapes lurking in the depths. This isn't a patch of clean sand. You have coral heads, rock piles, discarded junk, endless visual clutter to confuse you. A diver faces a constant psychological battle. Is that the object I'm hunting, or is it just another shadow? Human vision is flawed. You can stare right at something and not realize it's exactly what you're trying to find. That's why surface spotting rarely works until you actually hit the bottom, especially in the harsh glare of the day. People have been pulled from the open ocean in the middle of the night. But it's always the light. Rescuers don't see the person. They see a flashlight screaming out their exact location. Reports claim she was wearing the safety kill switch, the man overboard lanyard. At least that's what the husband declared. Anyone who grew up on the water sailing since they were kids knows the cold reality of those safety cords. Life on a boat leaves you with very specific, hard-learned lessons about how things work. In reality, people are far more likely to leave that safety switch unattached than they are to actually wear it. It's often just looped around the wheel or dangling nearby. It's wrong, of course, but it's what happens out there. The thing is, it serves one vital purpose: if you go over, the engine cuts immediately. Right then and there. That lets the person swim back and climb on. So it's not shocking if she hadn't properly clipped it to herself. And does it float? Well, not necessarily. No. Unless you add a buoy, it sinks. These things aren't built to stay on the surface by themselves at all. If it's meant to be worn, floating is just an afterthought in the design process. And it shouldn't just pop off during normal boat operations. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. Parts of this story raise serious questions, both for the curious and for those trained in maritime law enforcement. Some of those doubts can be dismissed quickly, though. We're talking about a small electric motor here. Essentially, it's a trolling motor with a bit of kick. It's not like she hit a 30 horsepower prop at 5,000 RP miss. That specific scenario. It just doesn't feel real. Not in the slightest. Once that motor cut out, a boat like that wasn't going to be carrying much speed anyway. So when it stopped, the boat couldn't have drifted that far away. But then you have to consider the wind. This is where the analysis gets truly revealing for us. Wind grabs a boat much harder than a person. In the water, you're barely exposing any surface area to the breeze. Because of that, the boat would move at a speed totally out of proportion to the person's drift. Wind just doesn't push a human through water that fast. That's where the first real doubt begins to take root. She goes over the side, and suddenly the logic fails. That is the inescapable conclusion of the facts. Let's break it down. Someone falls from a small boat and the engine cuts out immediately. They weren't doing 50 miles per hour with a long braking distance. The boat simply stopped in its tracks. The logical move is instant check on your partner and help them get back on board. You don't get that much separation even with 25-knot winds and 3-foot waves. The distance doesn't just expand like that. If it's your own wife or your child, you'd do anything, you'd move heaven and earth to reach them. That's why the story starts to crumble. Falling from a speedboat at 50 miles per hour is like hitting concrete while the boat keeps flying for yards. But this is different. There's a basic emergency protocol for this. The man overboard shout. It's the absolute bare minimum. It's the very first thing a sailor learns, and these two, they were experts. That's what's so deeply unsettling. This analysis is based strictly on what's been released in public reports so far. There's no family connection here. Just an objective look at the facts we have laid out in front of us. We reached out to expert meteorologist Emily Gracie about the weather that night. It's not a full forensic workup, but it adds context. It's enough to paint a clear picture of the conditions they were facing out on the water. 6-foot waves and winds from the east, but nothing wild. 30-mile-per-hour gusts. Yet one massive doubt remains. Are we talking about the open ocean here? Did this go down on the exposed side of Elbow Cay or the sheltered inner portion? That distinction. It changes everything. If they were actually tucked into the protected zone of the island, it's hard to swallow the idea of 6-foot swells hitting that tiny skiff. It just doesn't add up. The conditions described in the file read more like a broad regional forecast. It's the kind of report you'd check before crossing from the Bahamas back to Florida, a long haul through deep, unpredictable water. Anyone who has spent a night anchored on a boat, whether it's a sailor or a powerboater, knows the drill. You head for the western side of the island. You look for a place to hide. The island itself is a wall, a massive natural shield that holds back the sea. It is basic logic. You do whatever it takes to make sure the boat stays dead calm while you're stopped. You don't drop anchor in 6-foot swells. It just doesn't happen. Period. That's why that specific weather report probably doesn't reflect the reality of what they were dealing with. Besides, the Bahamas are incredibly flat. These islands have almost no elevation. Do you feel the wind? Of course you do. Does it kick up a little chop on the surface? Without a doubt. But you aren't catching the full weight of the storm because the boat is sitting on the leeward side. The island is standing between you and the raw fury of the currents and surface winds. Is it possible the wind was strong enough to shove the boat away from her? Or maybe she drifted one way while the boat was pushed in the exact opposite direction. The physics of it seem strained. It's always difficult to be 100% certain about these things. We are moving through some very murky territory here. You've got constant currents to deal with, whether it's the tide pulling out or the proximity of a deep water channel where the flow gets aggressive. The water gets nasty when the current is running one way and the wind is screaming from the other. It creates these short, jagged waves that have no rhythm. Could that have happened? Sure. The possibility is there. But we're left guessing about how strong that current actually was at that precise coordinate. Without standing on that deck yourself, you can't truly know the temperament of that water. You can see a sort of channel cutting between the island. But here is the real question. Isn't it more likely that she fell in and the boat simply drifted another 15 meters or so before stopping? If that safety lanyard was around her wrist, the engine dies the second she hits the water. She would have been right there bobbing against the hull. There is no way she ends up 20 feet away. That boat was barely crawling at 2 or 3 miles per hour. It wasn't even close to being on plane. And this is where we hit the question that haunts the entire case. If someone you love falls overboard, don't you dive in immediately? Don't you reach out with everything you have to grab them? It's pure instinct. It is almost impossible to imagine just sitting there watching your wife drift away into the dark. You do it for love, first of all. But you also do it because you can't live with the thought of what happens if you're too late. All of this creates a deep sense of unease. Some people have tried to brush it off as a tragic freak accident. Now, this isn't a jab at the internet, sleuths, not at all. The problem is that TV has warped how the public thinks a real investigation works. Anyone who has worn a badge knows that after 1,000 episodes of police procedurals, people expect a mystery to be wrapped up in 48 minutes. It's a frustrating reality to deal with. People think there is some magic software that can sharpen a photo until the killer's face appears. It's a lie. Real life is slow, messy, and often chaotic. Having said that, I'm not here to trash the Bahamian police. I assume they're doing the best they can with whatever limited resources they have on hand. However, there are technical details about boating and diving that are absolutely vital. If an investigator doesn't understand the ocean, they won't even know which questions to ask. They might miss a blatant lie in a statement and just take a witness at their word. There is one detail that is especially telling. Brian claims he tried to use the oars, but that an oar lock supposedly snapped. That little detail deserves a very close look. If you look at the crime scene photos of that skiff, there aren't any oar locks to be found. Not one. And those things on board, they aren't oars, they're paddles. There is a massive difference. It's simple. An oar is straight and designed to sit in a socket, so you can use leverage to move the water. A paddle has a T-shaped grip. You hold it with both hands and pull through the water using your own muscle. In the photos, all you see are 2 blue-handled paddles. No oars. No oar locks. That is a massive hole in his story. It's an inconsistency you just cannot ignore. Someone who grew up on the water sees that instantly. But a detective who lives on land, they might think it's a minor detail. It's not necessarily their fault, but not everyone has that level of specialized experience. And in a case like this, experience is the only thing that matters. You can't find the truth if you don't understand the environment. Not a soul knows everything. But if you understand the water, if you truly know boats, then every shadow and mark on that deck starts telling a story. Cases like this don't break because of luck. They break when someone with the right eyes walks in, someone who can strip a lie down to its barest components. That's exactly where we find the first real fracture, that glaring, inexplicable mismatch between the oars and the paddles. A nagging question remains. If he actually had an oar on that dinghy, and for some reason it snapped, what happened next? Why wasn't it recovered wood floats? Physics says it should be there. But maybe the ocean had other plans that night. We assume too much. We tell ourselves things must float, or events must follow a script. But the reality, it is far more chaotic and cold. On the surface, the smallest details become the lead. We keep coming back to stray cushions and those supposedly waterproof dry bags. They are designed to stay on the surface, sure, unless of course a hull crushed them under the waves or something even darker took place. Still, these possibilities, they aren't going anywhere. They remain firmly on the table. You simply cannot look away from the fact that the most vital piece of this entire psychological puzzle is just gone. This is the wall every investigator hits on land or at sea. The public is always the last to know what the locals are whispering to detectives. But if you have done this long enough, you start to see the pattern. Sailors in these parts are a tight-knit, closed bunch. You don't just leave your rig out there as a lone, vulnerable target. Dropping anchor in total solitude isn't just lonely, it is dangerous. Most people instinctively stick to the safety of the pack. Of course, that is how a landlubber thinks. We assume everyone wants the comfort of a crowd, but the sea attracts a different kind of soul. The refuge of the group. Some sailors are out there to escape. They anchor in the dead of night miles from the nearest light, specifically because they want the silence to be absolute. So we cannot just assume they were looking for company that night. It is nuanced. Yes, these people look out for each other when the storm hits. That is the code of the water. But we live in the age of the influencer, where every horizon is just a backdrop for the next perfect viral shot. They want to sell the dream of being the only human on a pristine, isolated stretch of white sand. Because of that, you can't just take it for granted that there were other witnesses nearby. That isn't an absolute truth. Not even close. It is a vital clarification. People think these boats cluster around the same few coordinates like a floating parking lot, but that is a misconception. Let's be real though. That specific K, it is not exactly a desert. Abaco is crawling with activity. It was peak season. The water should have been teeming with masts and engines during that time of the year. This isn't some castaway fantasy with nothing but sand and trees. It is a busy, established hub. It is a known safe haven, a place to bunker down when the weather turns ugly. Given how hard the wind had been screaming the days before, that harbor should have been packed with boats hiding from the gale. Just people hunkered down, waiting for the sky to clear, so they can weigh anchor and head out again. The hope, the only hope really, is that some witness can reveal what actually happened out there in the dark. But there is a deafening silence where the witnesses should be. No one is coming forward to speak. There is a massive hole in the middle of this file, the complete absence of an official description of the clothes Lynette was wearing. Everyone is asking the same thing. What exactly did she have on when she vanished that night? It makes no sense. You don't put up a missing person flyer without saying, "This is Lynette Hooker. This is what she wore. This is where she stood." To leave out those fundamental details, that isn't just an oversight. That is absolute pure negligence. We've become addicts to the lens. We just assume that somewhere a sensor caught the truth and saved it to a hard drive. We expect the answer to pop up on a screen, a smart doorbell, a stray phone clip, something digital and definitive. That is the great dilemma of the modern era, for better or for worse. But in the Bahamas, the rules of the game are very, very different. Sure, cameras exist, but they aren't watching your every breath. It is a place that still values its privacy and its shadows. There isn't that obsessive, constant need to track and monitor every single movement. You aren't in Fort Lauderdale anymore. You aren't in South Carolina. There are no eyes in the sky here. And that is exactly why this investigation has become such a nightmare to solve. Dinner at a restaurant, a walk to the dinghy, and then nothing. Just the dark water and a story that ends before the next chapter begins. It happened right in that stretch, the corridor between the restaurant and the sailboat's mooring. The shadows were already starting to swallow them whole. Was anyone even looking? It is highly likely that in that precise window of time there wasn't a single soul around to witness what actually happened. It is as simple as that. Yet a nagging question and navigation remains. Did that small dinghy actually have proper running lights, or were they just relying on a makeshift flashlight? According to Brian's own testimony, he was carrying a flashlight. Technically, they should have had navigation lights. If you are in a motorized craft, electric or otherwise, and you're moving between dusk and dawn, the maritime rules are incredibly strict. You have to carry lights because they signal you're heading to other vessels. In the pitch black, it is the only way to prevent a catastrophic collision. Exactly. But in the real world, let's be honest, hardly anyone actually outfits these tiny tenders with proper lighting for a night run. Almost nobody does it. Should they at least have a strobe to signal their presence? Without a doubt. It is a messy situation. There are just so many regulations to juggle out at sea. Then there is the lingering mystery surrounding the Coast Guard's actual response. We know the mission profile has shifted. It is no longer a search and rescue. It has officially become a recovery operation for remains. They even brought in a cadaver dog. But you have to wonder, what good is a dog in a scene completely dominated by water? How does that even work in the middle of the ocean? It sounds impossible, but there are actually several variables that make it viable. A search dog's nose makes human senses look pathetic. Their olfactory capabilities are on a completely different level. The scent of decay is incredibly potent. If that odor gets trapped along a shoreline or even in a still lake, these animals can lock onto it. Of course, not every dog is cut out for this. Some breeds have gifts that others simply do not possess. But put an expert handler with a high-tier dog on the bow of a skiff, and in theory they can track the molecules rising from a submerged body. Then again, if the wind is kicking at 20 knots, the whole thing falls apart. The air just shreds the scent trail across the water's surface. It is a brutal job for the animal. Expecting a hit under those conditions is asking for a miracle. But it is not impossible. Up in North Florida, there is actually a sea otter trained for underwater searches. Technically speaking, the animal tastes the scent trail. It doesn't smell the air. It perceives the molecules in the water itself. That is how it locates submerged remains and shows the handler exactly where the source is. There is a massive arsenal of technology available for this kind of work nowadays. They use sonar and similar gear as well, but that is a different beast entirely. Interpreting those images takes years of specialized training to understand what you're actually seeing. It is not that it is useless, but sonar isn't going to pick up a pair of sunglasses on the seafloor. It just doesn't have that kind of resolution. That requires a manual visual search. And if there is one thing the Coast Guard excels at, it is calculating exactly how objects drift on the surface. They ingest every scrap of weather data and maritime conditions from that specific window of time. Nothing is overlooked. If the incident happened at a specific point, they use tides and currents to plot a high probability trajectory. Logic dictates that the object should have drifted in one very specific direction. But remember, those formulas are for things that float. As long as an object stays on the surface, their estimates are incredibly accurate. That same math is worthless for anything that has already gone under. That is where the system breaks down. The Coast Guard are masters of the craft when the target is something they can actually see bobbing in the waves. That is why finding things like the dry bag is so critical. Those discoveries provide a starting point to reverse engineer the rest of the search. There is another piece to this puzzle. A close friend of the couple, someone with deep nautical experience, pointed out that the dinghy only had a small battery-powered motor. According to him, the spot they were headed to was over 2 miles away from the main sailboat. He is convinced that a round trip to the coast would have sucked the life out of a motor that limited. The conclusion is hard to ignore. There is a massive hole in this story. Making that trip in that specific boat just doesn't add up. No sane boater would attempt that run under normal circumstances. Leaving Abaco trekking all that way and trying to get back on a simple electric outboard, it raises some serious red flags. The constant fear of being left dead in the water out there is very real. We don't have the exact technical specs for that specific motor, but one thing is certain: it was electric. We don't even know what kind of battery it was packing. It was a 12-volt system, obviously, but the actual capacity is anyone's guess. Was it a modern lithium battery or one of the old-school ones? Was it topped off at 100% or was it already half empty? And nobody knows the manufacturer's rated runtime for continuous use on that particular model. Electric motors are finicky. Even the propulsion scooters divers use typically carry 2 separate batteries. Those are rated to last up to 14 hours, but only if you are running them at half power. Kick it up to full throttle, and your runtime drops by 3/4. So how fast were they going? Did they push the equipment past its breaking point? There are just too many unknowns. Any investigator worth their salt would be desperate to verify those numbers at all costs. We need to analyze the exact make and model, verify the true range and the state of the battery, reconstruct every moment to see if his story even holds up. Then another intriguing detail surfaced courtesy of an observer who's been following the coverage from day one. This person pointed out an obscure technical quirk that opened a new possibility if you press the ignition button in a specific way. Even with the kill switch pulled out, there is a bypass where holding your finger physically against the starter can coax a little current out. Whether this particular motor is capable of that, though, we just don't know. But on boats with traditional safety keys, if the man overboard lanyard gets disconnected, you can actually pin the mechanism back with your fingers to keep the engine running. It's not a pleasant experience. It'll slip 50 times while you're moving, but technically, it's possible to pull it off. It is one of those survival situations where you do whatever is necessary to reach your destination. That engine wasn't powerful or heavy enough to make that part a major concern. The official version is that she was thrown from the inflatable, but she didn't exactly fly 20 feet away. She just fell backward. That was literally it. If the story is that the boat jumped and she went overboard, she would have barely cleared the side of the hull. There was no high-speed ejection here. That dinghy just doesn't go fast enough for that kind of physics. Which means she likely wasn't far from him. Now there is a piece of audio that requires a very cold, careful look. A short fragment that lets you judge the credibility of his story for yourself. In that recording, Brian claims the wind separated them so fast he assumed she was trying to swim back to the sailboat, which was a good 1,000 yards away. His account continues marked by heavy pauses and hesitations. He mentioned 3-foot waves. Claims he tried to use the oars, but a rowlock snapped and the oar vanished. All while he says he was screaming her name. He says he yelled that he'd lost the oar and then supposedly dropped the anchor to stop the boat's drift. He also maintained he tossed her a flotation cushion right after she fell, though he couldn't tell if she ever actually reached it. After a full hour of calling out for her, silence. He says he didn't hear her voice once. Not even a whisper. Later, a speedboat zoomed by. He says he waved his phone light, but they were moving too fast to notice him. Another one appeared right behind it, maybe 5 minutes later. By then, he had his flares ready. He had 2 of them on him, but according to his version, they didn't see those either. This same audio had already surfaced before. It's a recording of him speaking with a friend, and he did it without knowing he was being recorded. Are there contradictions in his testimony? Absolutely. Any trained investigator can see the cracks spreading through this story. Based on how these cases usually go, we can assume the Bahamian police are already all over this. Most likely, they have already sat him down for a formal statement. We have to give the investigation room to breathe. This isn't some scripted TV drama. This is real life. The standard protocol is to record his testimony. The core idea is to lock his version of events down in black and white. That this is exactly how he says everything went down. Perfect. Then he signs that document, swearing there is nothing more to add to the narrative. And he will stick to his script saying, that is the whole truth. Fine. That's when the real work begins. You tear every detail apart, cross-referencing his official statement with the recordings and what he told his buddies. The profile emerging here is that of an incredibly shaky narrator. That inconsistency alone is enough to trigger a red flag for deception. Is some of it true? Probably. Is some of it a total lie? Almost certainly. The challenge is figuring out where the truth ends and the fiction begins, and that is what the pros are deciphering. Don't forget, Bahamian law mirrors the United States quite closely in these matters. Both systems are built on English common law. Even if it's hard to swallow in a case like this, the guy has rights. The authorities have to play this strictly by the book. If this hits a courtroom, the prosecution's evidence needs to be ironclad. Otherwise, the defense will just argue the evidence was gathered illegally. Claim there was no warrant. Argue they had no right to act. That's why we have to assume they're building an airtight case as we speak. It is time we had a blunt conversation about what really happens during a tragedy on the water, specifically in cases involving drowning. Far too often, the public immediately defaults to the assumption that it was just a terrible accident. They rarely stop to consider that something in the scene might not actually add up. There is usually a shadow lurking behind the surface of these stories. Think about it. A person who drowns because they cannot swim and someone held underwater by force look identical on an autopsy table, In both scenarios, the formal cause of death is recorded as asphyxia by submersion. Telling the two apart with the naked eye is a near impossibility. The truth usually stays hidden until later. A strange mark on the neck, for instance, might only become visible once the body has been out of the water for some time. Or perhaps a deep laceration on the scalp, or other subtle physical tells. These are the fragments of evidence that actually carry weight in a courtroom. There is this common myth that simply finding the victim allows you to reconstruct the entire timeline, but that is rarely how it works. I also do not buy the defense's old "no body, no crime" argument. She did not just evaporate into thin air without leaving a single trace behind. That simply does not happen. It is incredibly hard to believe that someone just snatched her away in the middle of nowhere. Every single piece of logic points to her being in that water. It is as straightforward as that. The real problem is that reconstructing the crime scene now is a total nightmare without a confirmed last point of sighting. That single data point is the most critical element of the entire investigation. Without it, you lose your anchor between point A and point B. And if point B is moved, then the entire map becomes a lie. Pinpointing a location in the open sea is notoriously difficult. Anyone can stand on a deck, gesture vaguely toward the horizon, and claim that she was right over there. But if they are off by 50 or 100 yards, the search area becomes an insurmountable canyon. People love using the needle in a haystack metaphor, but honestly, I would much rather look for a needle in a pile of hay than a needle on the ocean floor. With a haystack, you just grab a metal detector and sweep the area inch by inch until you find what you are looking for. The water is a different kind of hell. Conducting a slow, methodical, and well-executed search down there is an immense challenge. It can be done, certainly, but it requires an enormous investment of time and serious training. Unfortunately, dive teams rarely get the budget or the respect they need to be truly ready for this. Doing it right takes a level of planning and funding that very few organizations are willing to provide. There is another disturbing detail emerging from the analysis of this case. The fact that Brian decided to move his sailboat immediately after this horrific event took place. Regardless of what actually happened to Lynette before she went missing, his decision to pull anchor is a massive blow to his credibility. He admitted it himself. He claimed the last time he saw her, she seemed to be swimming toward the bow, but 1,000 meters is a full kilometer. That is an absurd distance for someone to just casually swim back to their boat in open water. If the vessel had just stayed put in that exact spot, investigators would at least have a reliable starting point. They could have drawn a 1.5-kilometer radius, using the boat as the center, and started a systematic search right there. But with the boat gone, where do you even begin to draw the line? This is a massive red flag. If your wife was last seen 1,000 meters from your boat, you do not move that vessel a single inch until you have personally scoured every square inch of that water. And even after that, you would keep pushing the search perimeter further and further out. If that was the last fixed point between him, the boat, and his wife, the only natural response would be to stay anchored right there. Before we go any further into the psychology of this, we need to take a second and really think about it. Out of all these jagged pieces, which inconsistency strikes you as the most damning? Leave us your theory in the comments. This is exactly what the real investigators are dissecting at this very moment. There is one more signal that demands our attention. Based on personal curiosity and years of experience in law enforcement, something is deeply wrong here. You can sense it in his voice. When you listen to him recount the events, the emotional weight you would expect just isn't there. People have spent a lot of time arguing over whether or not he was actually crying. The lack of tears isn't the real issue. The true red flag is his tone. It is the total absence of that raw, unadulterated panic, that desperate "what do I do now" energy. That emotional vacuum, when you cannot find your partner, is haunting. That kind of internal silence is deeply unsettling. Then there is the matter of how he used the oars. The photos we have do not clearly show if the boat even has oarlocks to secure them. It doesn't look like it has them. There might be a margin of error in what we are seeing, but the visible gear in the boat looks like canoe paddles, not proper oars. And his immediate reaction to toss the cushions into the water. That feels like a strange performative choice. At one point he says he dropped the anchor, and then later he claims he was just drifting for 7 hours. His testimony is completely falling apart. One has to hope the Bahamas police have cornered him with a formal statement by now. They should be verifying every single word, returning to that last point of contact, which remains the only real place to start. All signs suggest that is exactly what is happening behind closed doors right now. They are in there pushing him with the hard questions. What exactly did you see? What was she wearing? It is a grueling process that the public needs to understand in all its gravity. It's a jagged reality to navigate, especially in this modern age where everyone has been conditioned to demand instant results and immediate answers. We have to give the investigators some breathing room. Even when things look static, someone is out there grinding, pushing the boundaries and asking the questions no one wants to hear. Quality work demands time. If you're holding on to something real, a piece of the puzzle that could actually move the needle now is the moment to step forward. But if the goal is just to complain about how slow the clock is ticking, that doesn't do a damn thing for anyone. It offers zero comfort to Lynette's family in their darkest hour. It doesn't help the investigation either. Period. We have to lean into the possibility that a window of opportunity still exists. A real chance to finally drag the truth into the light. Look, there are world-class investigators out there who live for the job. They aren't chasing fame or making sloppy headlines. They're the ones who give everything because they actually feel the psychological weight of the cases they solve. The evidence suggests the police in the Bahamas are no different from a force in any other major city. There are people there who are desperate for a breakthrough. They're a tourist hub. The last thing they want is this dark cloud hanging over them a second longer than necessary. They don't want that stigma, and they certainly don't want to deny a grieving family the finality they've been searching for. People often ask about the nature of this work, the heavy, silent reality of diving into the deep to locate and bring back the victims. We've tackled cold cases that had been gathering dust for 50 years. In one instance, we recovered a woman and her 3-year-old son. To an underwater investigator, that kind of result is worth its weight in gold. Even after 5 decades, that family finally got a straight answer. They finally knew exactly what happened. Most people in this line of work have one ultimate goal: bringing a shred of peace back to the survivors. So it all leads to one final haunting question. Is there any world where Lynette is still out there today? Every instinct points toward foul play. A crime, to put it bluntly. That's the most persistent feeling when you look at the cold facts. If I had to pick a wish, well, there's a saying in this business: hope isn't a police strategy. But that dream would be that they had a blow-up, he pushed her over, and because she was fit and a strong swimmer, she made it. Maybe she had her dry bag and her passport with her. She swims to the coast, hits the sand, and simply decides she can't take another second of her old life. She vanishes. It sounds like a Hollywood script, doesn't it? It really does. But gut feelings are loud. And unfortunately, reality rarely mirrors the movies in such a perfect way. That's the tragedy of these cases more often than not. But if we allowed ourselves a moment to just dream, I'd picture her at some quiet beach bar right now, sipping a margarita, and finally tasting what it feels like to be free. Maybe one day the phone rings, and she tells her daughter she's okay, that she just needed to go off the grid for a while. God, I wish that was the ending. When you look at this through the eyes of an underwater investigator, you see perspectives that others might miss. Everyone following this story just wants one thing: for these fragments of information to finally burn through the fog and resolve the lingering doubts. If this breakdown, this small contribution to the analysis, helps move the needle even an inch, it was worth it. Lynette Hooker deserves the truth. Her family deserves peace. And while the ocean remains stubbornly silent, the truth is out there waiting to be found. If this story hit home for you, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on those notifications so you're the first to know when we have a break in this case. Which red flag stands out most to you? Was it the timestamp on that photo, the impossible drift timeline, or the fact that someone moved the sailboat? Let us know in the comment. And tell me, do you think Lynette Hooker will ever be found? Or is this case destined to be another name on a list of unsolved mysteries? I'll see you on the next case.